It's the card that many consider to be the greatest sports card of all time, the T-206 Honus Wagner. And today we're gonna dive deep into the history of the card and show you the greatest copy of the card ever.
I started out in 1889. My first minor league experience, I was 15 years of age. And in Major League in 1897 with Louisville, President Barty Dreyfus, I played for him 21 years, the same boss.
It is perhaps the single greatest card in the history of sports cards. It has such a legendary story.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful, vibrant copy of the card, the highest ever graded, the first card ever graded by PSA.
Yeah, it's serial number one.
Serial number one. Tell us about this card.
The Wagner card always has had a soap opera story. It's well known that this card was actually altered prior to it being graded. It wasn't known by PSA that had occurred because they weren't expert in grading. They were brand new. The card came in, they decided to grade it, and they evaluated it, and they had the scale, and they gave it the grade 8, which it deserves.
And is the highest by far.
Oh yeah, the next high I think is a 5.
Yeah.
And there are only about 30 in the world. But anyway, they graded it without knowing that Mr. Mastro had engaged in, going back some years prior to the time that they did the grading.
Bill Mastro, longtime figure in the sports card hobby.
He was a significant figure and a disgraced person by virtue of being convicted in court and pleading guilty in court to some really nasty activity. When the court proceedings occurred and it became official that the card was altered. And when I bought it, I knew that it was. I was convinced that it was. There was no official notice, but there was just too much information about it for me to proceed to buy it without recognizing that the issues that became public were factual. But anyway, I bought it with that knowledge. I always remember when the court proceedings ended and he admitted in court that he had altered this card, which I was pretty sure I knew that he had done. And he formally admitted it in court, which was a part of his plea bargain. In any event, shortly after that, maybe the next day, David Hall, chairman and founder of PSA, called me and introduced himself. And I knew who he was, and he, of course, knew I was. And he said, "Look, Ken, you know our company motto is that if you buy a card and we have graded it as if anything untoward were to occur, we will acquire that card from you for what you paid for it. So I'm calling to let you know we will offer you the $2.8 million that you recently paid for the card." And I told him, "Thank you very much. I really appreciate the integrity of your company and keeping your word, but I bought it with reasonable knowledge that the card had been altered, and I believe now, and I did when I bought it, that it had a cachet to it associated with wrongdoing." And I used the example with him of the number one public enemy of many, many years ago, John Dillinger, who owned a gun and he killed a lot of people with it. And the fact that he did that made his gun much more valuable than it would have been if it would have just been a regular gun. So I figured this being a part of a crime made it more valuable, and time now tells that I probably was right.
It's got the lore to it. It's got the backstory.
It does.
And a lot of collecting's about that.
But Dave Hall, proved to be a man of his word, and he was duped. His company was, when they graded this card as the first ever card being graded. Probably if they had been in business 5 years and this card would have come to be graded, they would have probably figured out that it had been trimmed. Yeah. I don't know if they would have, but they're very good at what they do. And unfortunately for all of us who have been active in acquiring cards. I have had cards that I have acquired that weren't graded. When sending to them to be graded, turned out to be something improper, be it shaved or colored or whatever. Our business, the business of collecting, has had an unfortunate, anything that involves a lot of money, there's always bad actors. And the collectible world has had its share of bad actors.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, how much did you pay for that card when you originally acquired it?
It was $2.8 million. Yeah. It was easily the largest price ever paid for a sports card at that time. Now, the world has grown and evolved, and cards are worth way more today than they were 20 years ago, but it was an outlier at the time. In becoming the owner when I did, I wanted to find out everything I could about the history of the card. And through my own research, and I actually spent some money on a third-party investigator to help trace the history, I was able to trace the card back at least to a narrative that suggests this card was in the Wagner family.
Oh, wow.
The story goes, I don't have the ability to have authenticated proof. So I'm reporting, it's the old story told around the room. It's the story I've been told by people who were engaged. But anyway, the card was owned by an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Wagner. What their relationship to Honus Wagner was, it was definitely not, he lived in Pennsylvania. These were other people with the same name, assumed they were family members. They ended up with this card and about 30 other T-206s. And they lived in Palm Beach, the husband and wife, and he passes away. And he had these cards in a shoebox, just raw cards in a shoebox. And the wife didn't really have any interest in, and so she is going to throw them away. And someone who worked for them, an employee in their home, asked if he could have them. And she gave him the cards. He didn't really know what they may be worth, but he had other family. He's in Florida. He has other family in New Jersey. And the last name of that family is Ray, R-A-Y. And those cards were given to a family member in New Jersey. He had a friend who had a card store. The group of cards were going to be monetized, and he called up Bill Mastro. And Mastro, I think, lived in Philadelphia, if my memory serves, but Philadelphia, New York, that area, somewhere in New Jersey. Mastro comes in to the card store, and the cards are in a box, and he looks at them and offers, and they bargain, he paid $25,000 for the group of cards. We know this card was one of them. What we don't know, because there is no, and I have visual evidence of this card from that time, given to me by the people I'm talking about who were involved in this process. They took photos of themselves with the card before it was ever graded, before it was ever altered. After Mr. Mastro got it, the alteration occurred.
So photos do exist.
The photos do exist.
Wow, pre-altered, wow.
Pre-altered photos. They're not for public viewing, sure, but they're a part of my legacy to my son, that he would have a file that has this history in it. What we don't know, there wasn't any evidence of how many of the other high-grade T-206s were in the shoebox of cards. It is my belief that some of the others that may be of the high grades that we're seeing today that ultimately got graded could have been a part of that $25,000 purchase.
Did people think you were insane when you bought that card and paid so much for it 20 or so years ago?
Well, I guess the answer is I've done several things being in baseball with real ball players that people think are insane, and it's what I do. I make decisions on contracts with real ball players. I've made decisions on acquiring these cards. I guess if you look at it from an investor point of view, I haven't been that insane. I've done well financially. To me, this is a whole lot more about owning history than it is what history is worth.
I know you started off, when you started collecting the bigger cards, you started off trying to compile a list of 20 of the greatest cards of all time.
Yes.
That was your mission.
Yes, sir.
This was the last of the 20 that
Yes.
you were able to acquire. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yeah.
And was that part of the reason why you wanted that card so badly and you were willing to set the all-time record price to get it?
Well, I didn't, the price points, this card was sold months before I bought it for a modest amount less than I paid. So the person who I bought from, he would be what you would call in the card world a flipper, I believe, and there's a record, a public record. I think he paid $2.4 and I paid $2.8. I didn't feel like it was an outlier in terms of the value that was placed on it for purposes of sale. And yes, it was a high watermark, but that's a lot of years ago.
Does it surprise you how good the color and the image and the perfectly white borders look on this Honus Wagner card?
Yeah, 115 years ago.
115 years old.
Oh, it's the whole process of all of this is eye-popping to somebody like me. I love the images. I love the history. I love the achievements of the players. I love the relationships I've had with some of these guys and still have with some of them. All of that, I mean, that's what a real collector is. Somebody who loves what it is that he or she is doing. And I really do love collecting.
Sure glad again to be in this old game of baseball. Got that old hot sundown beating on you. And I'll be out there and practice some now. Okay?
Right.